Okay, so this is going to be quite a ride. I mean, seriously, I'm not exaggerating at this point. It will be a bit fast. We're going through many different things. And I hope that some of these things, at least some of these things, will be useful for you. Очень люблю Киев, честное слово. Выступал бы на русском, но не дают, но ничего страшного. So let's switch to English. So I love Kyiv, and it's a wonderful, wonderful place, so thank you so much for having me again. Now, this is going to be dirty. There are going to be many little tricks, and there are going to be some dark corners of the web. Now, I have to ask you, how comfortable do you feel with dirty tricks? So, who feels very comfortable with dirty tricks? Okay, who not so much? I mean, there must be some fans of purity and semantics and stuff. Now, we have 755 slides to go through, so we better get faster to the point. And I'm going to skip this. It's not so important, not so important, not so important. Let's do this. Now, this is going to be a game, and this is going to be a tough game to play with some sound effects to play along. So, this is a game which is all about different front-end techniques and all the different things that I experienced in my project. I was working kind of with my colleagues that experienced kind of similar problems. And I'm going to pose challenges, quite complicated challenges, I would say. And it will be up to you to find out just the right solution for just the right problem, right? And of course, to make it a bit more interesting, because it's a game, if you have a right answer, I'm going to throw a chocolate at you. I hope you appreciate the timing here. So we have a lot of chocolate here, so there is a good reason to participate, all right? So you ready to play? That's nothing. That's like, come on, are you ready to play? Yeah. All right, so let's do this. Now, again, we have to figure out the level first. So who, I mean, it's quite late, right? So who wants to take it easy? Okay. Who wants to go medium? Who wants to go all the way? All right, so you know there is no way back. So once we've chosen it, this is going to be it. And because you want to go hardcore, let's jump straight to level number 2. Now, images. You might say, what's a big deal? What's a big deal with images? I mean, we've got this stuff with images. It's not really that hard, right? Now, let's talk a little bit. Let's think a little bit about image rendering. Now, there are many things what can potentially do if you have that landing page, that very critical, that very important landing page, and contains some images like a product image, and that image has to appear almost instantly, as fast as humanly possible. How far are you willing to go? How far will you go, and what would you do? Now, any guesses? Just shout. Inlining, but I mean, if you're talking about like a 1.2 megabyte JPEG image, you can't just inline it. I mean, we can accept bad, but it goes way beyond that. That's just evil. So it's something's, what is there? Yeah, but this will not take us that far. I mean, we need to go deeper. Yeah. Preload and cache them. All right, so that deserves one. I mean, preload always deserves a chocolate. So it's just always the right answer. I'm really bad at throwing at light, so I'm sorry about that. But let's figure this out, shall we? Now, first of all, we need to kind of get back to the root of the problem. The problem is, on the web, we have quite a lot of images. Now, if we look into the size of an image of a website, on average, we have 5.4 megabyte. And 3.8 megabyte of this, or actually 70%, is images. So this is kind of a big deal. Now, images do not block rendering, but if you do want to display that image, you need to do something about it. You can't just wait eternally for image to load. Now, luckily, Responsive Images community group, of course, kind of helped us to deal with responsive images in terms of source set and sizes and picture, and luckily also there are tools. For example, like responsive breakpoints generator, where you can upload an image, and you can define the size step. Let's say for every 25 kilobyte, right? I want to generate an image, and so I'm going to really have maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe 15 images, and so it will output the markup for you, the responsive images markup, the source set, the sizes, and even better, it uses the gravity factor. If you have an image that contains a face, it will gravitate towards the face, and clip out the necessary things. So it's kind of automated, art-directed responsive image breakpoint generator for you, right? Which is kind of cool. Oh, I paused here. No. And then it outputs everything, including the images in different aspect ratio and everything. You just copy it, you download the files, you plug it in, and you're done. But this is just basics. This is what we should do anyway. Now, there has been this technique for quite some time, which we probably shouldn't be using anymore. So if you have a large photo, oh, no, that's a good one. If you have a large photo that requires a transparent shadow, like this one, right? We're talking about this kind of landing pages with this kind of product images. This image is not a small image, and it has some back shadow in the back, right? Now, if you wanted to embed it as JPEG, you will have a problem with gradients, right? Because gradients don't compress well. If you wanted to embed it as a PNG, it would become a huge problem as well because it would be a huge file. So one common scenario here would be to just separate responsibilities. So you have a JPEG for the image, and then you have an alpha channel for as PNG, and then you put one inside of another, on top of another as a mask in an SVG container, and essentially we can embed then an image like this by saving approximately up to 800 to 900 kilobyte if you wanted to otherwise load the PNG file. And of course, there are also tools that allow us to do that. That's been around for quite some time. I'm just repeating it because it's so important. This is probably something we'll be using very often. But you can also go deeper. Now, one thing that compresses it really well is, of course, contrast. So you could say, what if I start with my image, I remove the image contrast altogether, and then I reapply contrast using CSS filters, right? This was a technique that came up, that was suggested by Una Kravitz, and the results are quite remarkable, right? So if you look into those images, visually they're not different, right? But the difference is around 1 megabyte on the large screen, and can go all the way to 200-300 kilobyte for regular images, something that you can actually apply quite a lot. And then, of course, you could say, but Vitaly, what if somebody chooses to save that image? And I could say, bad luck, right? But the image is delivered much, much faster, right? If you can assume that most people will not choose to save that image, then you'll be fine. And also, in terms of registering in the browser, it's not really a big performance overhead. It will take 0.277 extra milliseconds to rasterize this stuff. And of course, filters are also well supported, and it's coming in Edge as well. So this is great, right? And then there's been this technique for quite some time, which is called compressive images, right? Where the idea is, well, if you have taken an image and you output in the worst possible quality with 0% JPEG quality, and it's 600 times 400 in size, you can display it as 600 times 400, but then it doesn't look that great, hopefully. I don't know if you can see that, but it doesn't look that great. Now, you can also display it as 300 times 200, and then compare that image against another image, which is exported from Photoshop in a decent quality. So 80% or so, right? Now, again, people would not be able, most users will not be able to tell the difference. This image, though, is 21K, and this one is 7. You are saving 66% just because of more pixels, but of course, you're heavily misusing CPU, right? And memory as well. So if you're using it, you can try, but most of the time it will drain CPU, so please don't do that. Another thing that compresses well, because we need to go deeper, is of course blurring. So if you look into this detail into the lamp, and you compare this image against this image, which most people will not be able to tell apart, you're saving another 80 kilobytes just by doing that. But I know what you're thinking. That's not good enough. We need to go deeper, and we can, if we have time on a weekend or so, to play with a little bit of matrices. Who likes mathematics? Okay, some people. So I have a weekend project for you. So there are two kinds of JPEGs on the web. Sequential JPEGs, which are baseline JPEGs. You go to the page, the image loads from top to bottom, done, right? Or you have progressive JPEGs, where you get an image quickly in a bad quality, and then the quality gets better over time. Now, most images probably should be progressive, but if we look into how progressive images work, well, the reason why they have these steps or levels is because they have different levels encoded as well as thumbnails. So you have different scan levels, right? Now, by default, the scan levels that your image encoder has might not be the perfect scan levels for your particular image, right? So you could go ahead and say, maybe we can play with it a little bit, find just the right coefficients for just the right matrices to find out that level when we actually can start rendering, even on the second scan, much, much faster, so the structure is visible right away. So your goal is to ship fast and show soon. And to do that, you can just play a little bit with matrices. Who doesn't like that, right, over the weekend? And then find as just the right result so that even on the second scan, you already have a perfect structure. Now, the colors are off, and there are also very limited, there's a very limited palette of colors, right? But the difference between the second and the third and the fourth is just colors. The structure is kicking in faster, so you can save another 70 to 80 milliseconds on that. And I know that you probably don't want to do that over the weekend, so if you choose one JPEG encoder that kind of automates this for you, you can either use Adapt or Most JPEG, and this would be my favorite one. But of course, our Swiss friends from Google like bread and cheese, so everything that comes from that team is called Grützli or Brotli or anything of that kind. So they announced Grützli, which is a new open source encoder. It's really, really good, so it helps you save another maybe 10% or so. So highly encouraged to check it out as well. And of course, when we have a conversation about images, we need to talk about the most important format, which is, of course, GIF. Please don't use GIF, right? That's the rule. If you can, because you can always export it into, or convert it into MP4, and load MP4 instead with looping and autoplay and everything that you ever wanted. So the footprint will be much, much lower in terms of transfer and unload and decode as well, right? But I know what you're thinking, but that's not good enough, right? We need to go deeper. What if you have that perfect client? That client that sends you a low-resolution artifact, and this artifact has to go to the big landing page and look wonderful on the Retina screen. What do you do then? You cannot upscale an image. Or can you? Well, as it turns out, if you're smart enough, you can build machine learning, using machine learning and neural networks. You can build up an algorithm that, of course, cannot just recreate pixels, but it can guess pixels and kind of recreate them on the fly as well. So you can use Let's Enhance.io, where you upload an image, even in a low resolution, and it outputs a 4K image by guessing pixels in between. And the result is stunning. I mean, seriously, if you actually do plug in this image, you actually get this result, and it's actually quite remarkable, right? And so, if you haven't played with it, just look into Let's Enhance.io. Now, images are easy. That was like the easiest thing ever. Let's go into web fonts, because web fonts are one of the main culprits when it comes to performance. So here's a question for you. Now, we want beautiful typography. Who doesn't like beautiful typography? But performance matters as well. How far will you go to load web fonts almost instantly? You do not want the user to wait ever, but you do want the content to appear in web font, in that magical web font that designers desperately want you to have. How far are you willing to go? Sorry? Try to find a font on the user's machine. You can do that. You can also just delete web font and use local fonts. That's probably better. You can use base64 encoding and subsetting. I'm running out of chocolate here. Am I supposed to throw it? Okay, who really wants one? Nobody, because it's like, what kind of chocolate is that anyway, right? Okay, I'm just going to leave it here. But I do want to throw it anyway. I like throwing things. Anybody? Oh, I like that. You can say, you know what? I'm going to have a page. For that page, I'm going to track all the characters used, create this font that contains only these characters, and serve it. And if the designer or copywriter comes to me and wants me to add more content, not today, not on Friday, sorry, right? Well, you can use font display as well. Okay, I like this kind of audience. Here we go. All right, so let's take a look. Now, first of all, I remember those times when things used to be easy. You just plug in the font in link, and you go home, and that's it. Now, these times are over forever, because at this point, you really have to think twice when you're loading that font. Now, obviously, we'll be serving WOF and WOF2, and in rare situations, we would probably serve OTF just for legacy, but most of the time, we can just serve generic fonts for them, like platform fonts for them. And this is probably what we're going to end up with. right? But what we need to understand, of course, is that when a font family name is used in CSS, browsers will match it against all font face rules, download web fonts, and only then display content. That means if you define a font, but then you have no reference to it, to that font family in your CSS, this font will not be required, will not be requested. And we, of course, can use platform fonts, like on iOS and Android, Microsoft and Fallback and others, excuse me, right? Just to have a nice enough fallback. And most of the time, we will be relying on things like Typekit or maybe Google to serve fonts. Now, this is what it usually looks like. You have HTML request, CSS request, then you request font A or B, depending on whether you need it in your CSS or not, right? And then once DOM and CSS are constructed, if font face matches, only then a font will be required. Now, we know this. But if fonts are not cached yet, they will be requested, downloaded, and applied, deferring rendering, which might take time, which is why this happens, right? Now, we talk about content first, mobile first, while most of our users experience link underlines first, which is kind of sad if you think about it. And we have different experiences, right? So in Internet Explorer, we have flash of unstyled text. In Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and others, we have flash of invisible text, when no content is displayed until the font becomes available. The only snowflake, the special snowflake, is, of course, Safari. Because Safari has time. It has nowhere to go. You know? So even if you come to the site as a user, well, you just wait, because why not, right? But this is a problem, because this would be happening in a slow motion, right? 3 seconds timeout, then fallback kicks in, and then for every single font that we have on the page, we'll have this switch, right? Where we're switching from one font, fallback to web font. Like, let's say, from Arial to bold, and then from Arial to italic, from Arial to normal, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, many of us will be using font loading API. This has become the standard these days, where we can just create a new font face object, and then based on the fact whether the fonts have been loaded or not, right? We can just add some classes and then actually have trigger the expected behavior as we want it to appear on the page. And it actually has a very good support as well, so really no reason not to use it. But there are also other ways. One way is to apply this above default CSS thinking to web fonts as well, where you can distribute or separate your font into 2 subfonts, so to say. Essentially having a minimum that you need, like a subsetted font that you want to serve fast. It might contain lowercase, uppercase, punctuation, and things like that. You want to serve it fast, and you want to load the entire page in that font. It could be only regular, for example. It doesn't have to be italic and bold either. It can be just one. And then whenever you're ready with that, you download fonts asynchronously, and then have a switch for everything at once, right? And this is called critical FOFT. You can also use it by encoding data URI, for example, instead of loading it asynchronously. And you can also use preload, right? Which would be the easiest way, actually, to do that. And there is a fundamental, like, really huge comprehensive guide of how you can achieve that, right? And in fact, you will find quite remarkable results. But we thought, what if we went deeper? And so we decided to come up with a new acronym that you feel free to tattoo it or use it in your academic papers. It's C2SFOFTRWDDURISW, also known as Critical Two-Stage FOFT Render with Data URI and Service Worker, where you do the same thing, but then you put those fonts in a Service Worker, and then whenever you load the page, you check if the fonts are in Service Worker and load them from there, instead of HTTP cache or local storage, God forbid local storage. And you might say, why? Why would you go to these extremes for something as simple as web fonts? What did they do to us that we need to treat them so poorly? Well, how many of you remember this article? Not many people. Oh, it's really old. Okay, this was an article which changed a lot in the way I perceive HTTP cache. I don't trust HTTP cache because HTTP cache is not reliable. So this is a study which was done by Yahoo back in 2007, where they just wanted to check what is the hit rate in Yahoo, on yahoo.com, from people coming to the site quite often. And what they realized that 40 to 60% of Yahoo's users have an empty cache experience, although they are supposed to have the files in the cache, right? And you might say, but yeah, 2007, things must have changed since then. Well, this is an experiment which Facebook did 2 years ago, which kind of the same thing, and they found out exactly the same rate as well. On average, 44.6% of users are getting an empty cache, although they were supposed to have full cache. Which means, with web fonts specifically, that when your users come to your site, there is a 50-50 chance that they will have to refresh the fonts or re-download the fonts, forcing the browser to have the switch from the fallback font to web font. That's probably not what you want. And in our case, the hit rates were even lower, right? And if we look into the caching and how it works, for example, in Chrome, well, first of all, Chrome is going to look it up in the memory cache. If the fonts are not in memory cache, or any other resources are not in the memory cache, it's going to look into the network stack, and then it's going to check in the HTTP cache. And if the HTTP cache doesn't have it, only then it's going to go and actually make an actual request. And these are the cache hit rates in Chrome. And if you look into it, right, fonts are usually the first resources that are going to be kicked out from the cache, HTTP cache. Now, how many websites do you visit a day? Who never visits more than 5 a day? Only a few people, I'm pretty sure, right? Probably more like 50, maybe 40, 60, 70. So whenever something is added to the cache, something has to leave the cache, and fonts will be the first to leave the cache, right? Which is why we do this entire beast with Service Worker. You can do more, of course. I mean, you can just locally refer to local fonts and call it a day. But even better, you really can be very specific about the Unicode ranges, the characters that you need. It's not dynamic subsetting, but you can define what Unicode range you need, right? So let's look at a concrete example. For example, if you're loading a font which is available in Cyrillic and in Latin, instead of packing everything into one font, you can separate them, and you can load that Latin font only if you have characters on the page that are within this Unicode range, right? And load Cyrillic only if you have at least one character in that Unicode range. Right? So you don't have to pack everything into one, or load both just in case. But when we look into Unicode range, it's kind of a bit mysterious, isn't it? Do we know what these characters, what these ranges actually are? If you look into the schedule, and you look into this wonderful emoji here, can you guess the Unicode point for that emoji? That's a wonderful game for nerds like you. And the parties that's coming up later, right? So can you guess it? 7, seriously? I mean, if somebody says 42, I'm going to drop the mic here. No. So if you look into this beauty in detail, just look at it. Isn't it beautiful? And it's awaiting us soon after I'm finished, right? I'm not done yet. Yes. All right. But then, if we start playing and we start finding out, so what do you do? Now, some boring people would go on Google and trying to look it up, but we're not this kind of people, are we? No. Because there are books. Books, like, you know, the kitchen table books? Welcome to the Unicode book. This is the book that contains all the symbols of all the Unicode symbols in that book. It's a thick book. It's not a small book. And so whenever somebody comes to your house, they sit down, they open the book, and they see A, B. Isn't it wonderful? And can explore the Unicode ranges and things like that. It's really, really great. So whenever somebody asks you that question, you take that book, you open that book, you start browsing through that book, and then eventually on page, I think 1477, you start going to the food section, and then you go deeper, and here it is in its beauty, right? Welcome, just now you know, Mr. or Miss, I'm not sure, 1F37B, right? Now we know. And of course, when we start talking about Unicode points, we can go deeper because even text compression can benefit from font files like that, because we can do things like this, for example. If you really care about the compression of your source code, maybe you should do this for a change. There is no way this is going to perform. I mean, this is, of course, like, you can just use black and white Unicode symbols. You don't have to use emoji, because emoji usually use 4 bytes. You need 1. You don't need, like, 4 bytes for this. You can use just 1, as long as they're all kind of unique, right? The problem is, debugging is kind of hard. But, you know, you could do that, right? And some people play with those characters. Like, I realize it's kind of totally missing the point, but I love this kind of work. Just look into this. Isn't it beautiful? Right? And you can do it with CSS, like we're talking about generators like JS and stuff like that. We don't need that. We don't need processing. We have CSS. We don't need processing. So you just add enough divs or spans or whatever. You use before or after, and you just add some characters, and you can color them and do whatever you like and create artwork. Like this, out of characters. Welcome 1556 and 274, and we have more and more, and this is just beautiful. You can just have a random range. It's a great way of exploring Unicode as well, right? And these are the 200, 500s, right? And there is more you can do, of course, with it. And I really have a lot of respect for people doing that, and this is done using linear gradients and iconic gradients. And you can even do this. This is a masterpiece, isn't it? Can you count the number of beers there? 5, 4, no, it's 77, but it's still cool, right? And you can create this kind of doodles on your own, but I'm totally off topic, but it's great, CSS doodles. And I have so much respect for Huan Chuan doing that, and if you're looking into this, Unicode patterns will help you. So Unicode range is really, really important. This is kind of the point. We just need to understand when we can use it. And finally, the most important thing we can do there, and these are the slides kindly provided by Monica Dinchulescu, by the way. She's done a lot of research on this, is font display optional, right? So font display optional is the easiest thing you can do to improve performance, essentially. Because it allows you to be really granular about how your fonts are going to be loaded. So by default, it's block, which means it's a standard behavior that most browsers have. So you block and keep the content invisible for 3 seconds. Then you switch to fallback, and whenever web font kicks in, you have a switch. But then you can also have a swap, where you can say, I don't want to have this invisible phase at all. I want the content to be right away available as fallback font, and then whenever web font kicks in, do the swapping. Or fallback, where you give 100 milliseconds to the browser to either retrieve the fonts from memory cache, or HTTP cache, or local storage, or service workers cache, to get the fonts displayed. And if it doesn't happen, then you fall back to the fallback font. And then if the fonts actually get through the network within 3 seconds, you do the switch, right? But if it doesn't happen, you don't do the switch. And then very similar to that is optional, which essentially also gives the browser this kind of window of 100 milliseconds, right? But then it's really up to the browser to decide to have that switch right now or not. So the font will be put in a cache, but it's then up to the browser to decide based on the network whether it should be requesting or kind of having that switch or not. And it's actually really well supported as well, right? I mean, except this, of course. But Edge is coming. And unfortunately, in Opera Mini, well, we're used to it as well in many ways, right? And then the last thing you can do is minimize jarring, right? Because if you have this switch from fallback to web font, sometimes you want it to be kind of close enough so it's not too weird when you have that switch. And so this is what you can do. You can say, well, I'm going to try to map my fallback font against the web font. And there's a wonderful tool by Monica called Font Style Matcher. Use it all the time, like all the time when we do consultancy and stuff. And you can just copy CSS and you're done. It just kind of matches the ligatures and letter spacing and word spacing and other things. Really, really well done, right? And then finally, one more thing here. Because of course, I mean, here we have iOS, Android, Microsoft, and some fallback fonts, but we can go and use the entire stack on different platforms. This is probably the most comprehensive thing you can find. And so your stack could look like this. And maybe sometimes even you can just kill web fonts altogether because native fonts are actually pretty decent anyway. Right? And of course, you can also potentially use this kind of stuff if you have a low battery. For example, maybe we should not load web fonts altogether. And there is a battery status API, which has been removed from Firefox. It's still available in Chrome. It's really up to you to see if you want to use it or not. And you can also use device memory header at this point with client hints to maybe load fonts only if you really need them. Right? And this is, again, where variable fonts that we talked about yesterday already will become extremely more important, even more important, just because if you want to support a large variety of different typefaces, then you will have to deal with this kind of techniques a lot. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, it's a great, great talk by Monica about that. Oh no, we have a bonus level. And once we covered the most important things, we kind of need to look into the dirty, shady side of things, right? And this is where, of course, third-party scripts come into play. So, of course you know that the tag managers, the ad scripts, all the wonderful analytics tools that we put on the page, put on the site to make sure that we know exactly what the customer is doing. Wonderful tools in times of GDPR, which is coming into power today, right? Wonderful, but how are we going to deal with them? Because these scripts get access to the entire DOM. Usually, they're embedded using the script tag, so we give them access to everything. And they come, and they don't come alone, do they? No, they bring their friends, and the friends of their friends, and you end up with 7th-party scripts and 8th-party scripts, and they trash you. And the trash your site is like inviting strangers to an apartment and letting them trash your house. So we need to tame them. We need to control them. How will we do that? Yeah, we can use the sync and defer. The problem is they still get all the access of the DOM, or to the DOM. iframe, I like you, all right? What were you saying? Don't use third parties. Oh, I'm really bad at this, I'm sorry. Well, what if you have to use third parties? Somebody there wants chocolate, I'm sure. Oh, I'm pretty good, I'm getting better at this. That's pretty cool. All right, so let's have it, shall we? Now, we need to get to the bottom of this third-party scripts and really understand what the hell we're going to do with them. And the problem is, they really ruin the dedicated performance effort. You might have a dedicated performance team, but if you don't control what's happening in terms of third parties, they really ruin the entire experience. They are heavily influencing end-user experience, but the metrics isn't really influenced by end-user experience. It's influenced by data, right? And usually we can't control them much. Now, the problem is that they're very unknown and dynamic resources. We don't really know from which origins we're going to get those scripts, right? We don't know the hosts, we don't know the resources, we just have no idea. So, first of all, of course, we need to understand the impact that these scripts have, and there are tools for this, like request map, which allows you to build a map of all the scripts and what they do and what they actually call, and the impact of those scripts as well. And if we look into a regular site, like let's say autoguide.com, right? I mean, they are loading behind the scenes 144 scripts. That's a lot of scripts. And of course, in order to make sense of it, right? Of course, they may be deferred and using a sync and stuff like that. But one way or another, when you're scrolling, you will actually feel the lag because there are tons of tracking pixels everywhere, right? And so if you look into the request map, you can actually explore and see exactly what is happening. And you can see that there are some scripts that are more expensive, meaning they might be calling fourth party, might be calling fifth party, and so on and so forth, right? And if you look into the bottom-up view in Chrome, you'll find out that some of them, like double-click here, I mean, seriously, it takes 1 second, 1 full second for them to execute and parse. That's just ridiculous. That's really, really expensive. Whenever you add a script, whenever you add a third party, there is a cost associated with it, always, right? And even if you don't do that, you might really end up draining everything. Well, if you even live in YouTube now, there are ads that actually use CPU to drain and mine cryptocurrency. Do you want to be used to mine cryptocurrency for somebody else? I don't, right? So this is why, of course, Google, who wants to make the world a better place, decided to introduce an ad blocker on February 15th, 2018. Of course, it blocks all the ads except Google's, and so essentially you are better off. And yes, you are better off in many ways, but again, some ads are, of course, getting through. Most of the time, of course, Google's ads will be getting through. And it's interesting, of course, that the other side. Why is it important as well? Well, because Google Chrome is going to remove the secure indicator, the padlock, the green padlock icon, starting from Chrome 71 in September, which means that sites that are not secure will be marked as not secure, and essentially assuming that secure is default these days, which is great, right? So essentially, eventually, whenever you're running HTTPS, it's just the default. But then if you're not running HTTPS, or you have third-party scripts which are doing something strange, they will be hopefully blocked. But if not, well, this is what you're going to end up with. Now, Google Chrome's native ad blocker, again, is one thing that's kind of helpful. But we have another thing coming in today. right? And I'm kind of really lucky to be standing on the stage today. I mean, I don't know about you, I'm really excited about GDPR and its impact on users. I think we're going to have much faster websites as a result, just because many people are a bit afraid of what is going to happen, so they just don't load scripts these days, which I think is great. I don't mind, right? The problem there is GDPR has an impact on third parties as well. If you're loading Twitter, if you're loading Facebook like buttons, or anything, and so you have third parties on your site, and if they are collecting data via the script tag, because they get embedded via the script tag, well, if the customer, your user, decides to remove all the data, which is your responsibility to provide, it's also your responsibility then to prompt third parties via their API to delete all the data that they have about just your customer, right? So you need to be aware of that. And if you have 144 scripts, good luck with that, right? This is going to be quite a journey, right? And so just in case, this has been very helpful for us. Maybe we can talk during the party later what we decided to do. And there is also tons of GDPR as a service now. You just pay $49 a month, and you'll be GDPR compliant, right? Well, this is a nice business idea for the future, right? But then again, this is just on the side note. So, okay, now we know, if we know what third-party scripts we have, we need to deal with them somehow. So first of all, we can just decide to block and see what happens in terms of performance, in terms of conversion, and things like that. But you can also automate it. And this tip comes from Harry Roberts, who's been doing that for quite some time. And again, if you go to request map perf tools, and you run your test against web page test, you get this hash. You can plug it in into request map, and generates that map. You can then click on this download CSV data at the bottom. You generate the entire list of all the third parties that you use on the site or on the page. You can actually strip all the unnecessary stuff, put it in web page test back again, where you can block requests from all third parties, and then you get another web page test score, and you can then create this nice chart where you compare what happens if you don't have third parties and what happens if you do have third parties. Maybe there are some critical ones, so you keep them alive, but this gives you data that you can actually work with. So you can create this kind of spreadsheets, and then you can see, oh, this one, buy-sell ads here, it's 130 kilobyte, right? And its mean time is 145 seconds. And if there is one which takes like 500 milliseconds to respond, maybe you should be thinking twice about using it or not. And even better, you can plug in that data that you got from web page test, then in here, in your Google Doc, and you get a nice overview of everything that you're using, and then it gives you, again, a nice conversation to have, like a nice overview that you can have a conversation over. That's super useful. And if you want to test what happens if a site server times out, there's also a black hole server, web page test black hole server endpoint, which just goes into endless loop. So you probably want to make sure that if that page goes down, that you don't go down with them, right? So you can just put it in HTTP hots for testing, and then see what happens. And in fact, the best way to embed third parties today is definitely not the script tag, if you can afford it, but the iframe. Because iframe, when the scripts run in the context of the iframe, they don't have access to the DOM, right? And so we can do one thing, for example. You can say, if you're using a service worker anyway, you can say, so I'm going to raise resource downloads with a timeout. If that site, third party, doesn't respond within 3 seconds, I'm going to not even try, and I'm going to skip it altogether. You can just embed this logic in a service worker and make it work. And with iframe, you can sandbox what you actually allow scripts to do. For example, you can prevent them from running alerts, from running alerts, from submissions, plugins, and so on and so forth. And that's what it's probably going to look like. You can say, I want that script to be able or to not be able to create pop-ups or allow scripts or forms, contain any forms. You can be very specific about it. It's a really old property that you can actually use. So you can really be very specific about what every single script can do. And again, of course, it's well supported because it's been around for ages. And there's a nice article from 2013 by Mike West covering everything you can do with it, right? And even better, you can use Intersection Observer to replace all those ad tracking scripts that you have with something that's a bit more performant, while without tracking that customer, right? So you could do things like this. Intersection Observer is one of those APIs that allow us to track the visibility of a certain component, right? So this is very important for advertising, because you can say that ad is visible or that ad is not visible, right? Or I can preload or lazy load that script, so whenever the customer is within 600 pixels away from that ad, I'm going to preload some extra scripts required for it. And there are different observers. There is a whole family of them. And they're just a replacement for slow, synchronous, rendering intense scroll event listeners. So I'm sure you know that anyway. But they were designed specifically with ads and social widgets in mind. They're like the saver at this point, right? And I'm going to just skip it a little bit. Essentially, you can just say, whenever that thing pops up or shows up, right, then I can have a callback and I can act on it. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty nifty. And while talking about intersection observer, another thing you can do with it, and that's like really magic, in a way, you can mimic or simulate element media queries with them. How many of you are familiar or know what I mean by that? So element media queries essentially are media queries where based on the width of the component, you can change the behavior of that component. Now, media queries in general give us access to the global viewport. You can say if the global viewport is at least 1024 pixels or so, do that. But we can't say if that component is at most 300 pixels, do that. Now, you can do that with intersection observer. Now, how does it work? Now, that's a bit dirty, but I promise dirty, so here you go. So imagine we have tons of breakpoints. For every breakpoint, we create a div of that width, right? So let's say we have a media breakpoint starting and kicking in at 720 pixels. We create a div of a width of 720 pixels. We put it on the screen, like, opacity 0 or whatever, right? And if we know that that thing is fully visible in the entire viewport, then we kick in a media query, right? And we do that for every breakpoint, right? And we trigger a class change when these divs are actually fully visible. And you end up with this where you have, of course it's JavaScript, of course it's a hack, but it's actually really remarkably fast because intersection observer is a very fast API, right? And so we can actually just look into it for particular cases. I'm not saying that this is replacing element media queries, but you can use them for that purpose, right? And if you're interested in it, Snowball, Equio is your path, right? It's a really, really great thing to look at. And the section observer also, of course, well supported and has polyfills too. Oh, this is going to be madness. Okay, ready? Yeah, all right. You've been promoted to build advanced, interactive, responsive HTML emails. In fact, your current title says, I'm a full-stack interactive email developer. Here's a question. Now, email is a very difficult media to work with, right? What if you have somebody coming to you and telling you, we have this image, it's a very important image. That image has to be visible to everybody, no matter what. We know that some images, or some clients, just do not display images by default. But what if you have to? You will be fired if you don't do that. How will you achieve that effect? That image has to be visible no matter what. Any ideas? So base64 encoding in my test didn't work because it's then that image is attached rather than included. I don't know how you would include it, so you can show it to me later maybe. You will still get the chocolate. Sorry? ASCII. Yeah, but ASCII is not the same as an image. ASCII is great. You can get 5 chocolates for ASCII, but it's not the same. Yeah? Yes. Oh, I did forget to include that sound. That was sad. Okay. So essentially, the idea is very simple. It's like really going back in time when things used to be much, much different. Now, you have an image, let's say 250 pixels times 250 pixels. Now, that's pixels, right? So if we take every pixel, yes. Oh, yes. We take a pixel And then every pixel could be represented as a 1 times 1 TD with the background color applied to it. We use border collapse, and voila, you're done, right? And even better, if you wrap a link around it, it will work like charm in Outlook 2013, right? I don't know why, but it does. So welcome to the world of email development. For full stack, I coined this term today, full stack email development. Now, let's look into this world, because after this session, I'm pretty certain that some of you will want to embark on this journey, or never, one way or another. So, this is the world of remotely loaded or not loaded images, the world of table background cells, where you need to color background cells to make sure that images are, that you have the structure even if images are not displayed, the world where you have to play with alternative text. Because alternative text matters. What if images are not displayed? And you might say, so what's the big deal? We have Gmail that supports media queries now. The problem is, this is the world of Gmail. The world of Gmail is fragmented just like Android is, right? So, for example, media queries do work on regular website, the gmail.com. They do not work in IMAP clients. They do not in Android IMAP client. And they do work depending if you have a Google Apps account or not, which is just ridiculous. You're getting media queries only if you have a Google Apps account. You're not getting them without. Isn't that a bit strange? Just saying. It's kind of strange, right? And so there is a really great article by Remy Permenta, who does a lot of work in this area, making things like making sense of the Gmail beast. It's a story of its own. And you could say, so what's a big deal? Like image, blocked, not blocked. So if image is blocked, we're just displaying alt text, right? No. First of all, there are many different steps you have to take it. I will not going to go for this. It really depends, heavily depends, on what you're going to do and how you're going to load it. If you have a source, if you have alternate, if it's empty, if it's not empty, if text fits or not. This is the most ridiculous thing ever. So if you have an image with an alternative text on it, lorem ipsum, fits, great, I'm going to display it. Fits, great, I'm going to display it. Because, why not? So what do email developers do if they need to display that alternate text? We can use font size, which is just ridiculous, on the image, and then tweak it a little bit up and down just to make sure it's fine, right? And it's just really ridiculous in many ways, and then it depends if text fits or not. It's really, really complicated, and this is the world that email developers have to face every single time. And then, in the fact, if there is no alt provided, what some browsers will do is look in the title attribute as a fallback, and then other browsers will just do nothing and display no text. This is the world. Do you want this in your working environment? Just as a reference chart to print out? Could be interesting, right? But of course, email developers are creative people. I mean, who is actually building email by almost every week or so? Okay, once a month. Okay, let's look at these wonderful people. We need to hug them all together. They are really, really creative and really, really good. Because you can do this. So images are not displayed, so what? We'll find a way. Right? Or even better, talking about GRU and superheroes. It's almost the same, it's just faster, right? And here, this is just remarkable. This is a piece of art, and this one is my favorite one. Right? So this is the world, and again, Remy Parmenter has been collecting it. And you might say, okay, images, so enough with images. No, not enough. Because what if it's not enough to just display alternative text? You want an image if it can be displayed, but if it cannot be displayed, what you want to display is different amount of text, preferably in different colors and different font sizes, but only if images is not loaded. How would you do that? Yes. For example, like this. Instead of just adding an image, you add tons of spans over here. Right? But by the way, it's really fully accessible and so because it has roles and has area roles and things. That's actually does work. And you can end up with this if an image is not displayed. Right? Which is just genius, if you ask me. And it's coming from Rebel Mail team. It's really incredible. And of course, most of the time you'll be dealing with some boring stuff like this, where you kind of move things around, because you can't use Flexbox, of course, you can't use JavaScript, of course, so you're using table cell, table header group, table footer group to move things around. And if you have this, you can even nest tables inside of a TD, right, without TD inside, and then you move things around this way instead of using divs. This is the world. And of course, again, if we're looking at the browsers, well, mail clients in this case, if you want to test your email, well, you probably will need to watch out for like 10,000 different renderings potentially, because of different clients and different machines, different browsers, and so on and so forth. It's really a beast. And so, of course, the most popular one is Apple's iPhone Mail app, which is actually very good, and Gmail, which is actually pretty good. And the others, well, not all of them are good, let me put it this way. But you can do tons of stuff. For example, imagine this. You need to embed a live Twitter feed in your email, right? So, and you need to have this kind of, a little bit of Twitter that just got up, the tweet just came in effect. But you really can't use JavaScript. So what would you do? Yeah, you would use this as animation, but how do you get those tweets in live time, in real time? So every time you open an image, and open the email, it should be up to date. Move to Telegram. That doesn't help here. Yes, so you will be on the server every 2 seconds or so. You're going to regenerate an image which contains last 10 tweets or so, and then you animate it in your email with CSS, right? And then you also have this kind of tricks, which is just remarkable. I mean, some of you I know love spaces. Who likes a good space? Empty space. Oh, okay, so there are different kind of empty spaces, very different ones. One of them, this is a very special one, is zero-width non-joiner, which combined with a non-breaking space allocates for exactly one character. Now, some developers, email developers, would do this. The well-known ZWNJ and BSP hack. Why would you do that? That's just ridiculous, right? Now, the problem is, most mail clients, they just take text, whatever it is available, right, and they display it all together here as 2 or 3 lines. But what if you want to cut off? What if you want this? Well, then you add this empty space as much as is necessary, and then it's going to look cleaner, right? This is the world. And this is the world as well. Because we need to design not only HTML email, we need to serve meaningful, more or less meaningful plain text emails as well. And some of them are looking just horrible, just really, really bad. And so many designers are creative. Why don't you use some different, decent plain text fallbacks instead? Or, even better, have you ever thought about using ASCII with marquee tag? Because you can, right? It's much faster than an animated GIF would be, right? But then there is an ultimate one. That thing I will never forget, ever. So some of you might be familiar with the radio box checkbox hack. But the idea is, well, we don't have interactivity in email, right? So we don't have JavaScript. So one way to mimic interactivity is to use label and checkbox. So whenever you tap on a label, checked, unchecked, checked, unchecked, right, happens. And it's known as a checkbox hack. Now, what if I told you that with some mysterious ways that only developers, only email developers can do, you could move away from traditional, good old, boring email to this in your email. You have a checkout experience. You can increase quantity. You can look up an image. You can use a gallery. You can click on an image and then move in between like you would do in a normal carousel with different thumbnails. You can select the size. You can kind of open up a lightbox. You can even have maybe client-side, mail client-side validation, right? And then you click on the button to buy things, and you actually buy things. Is it possible in email today? And of course, the answer is, oh yeah. It depends on how dirty are you willing to go. Now, remember these times? Remember that? Right? What if we moved away from this, which is a little bit outdated, a little bit old-fashioned, right, to something a bit more modern, like this, right? Welcome. Why? Because you can, right? Welcome to the world of checkboxes. Many of them, in fact. every single thing. You'll have lots of input elements, have lots of labels, have lots of CSS. Right? So it's check, not check, check, not check, 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 not check, check, check. Style this way. Right? This is how it works. And if you look into this, you might ask, okay, so how much would it require? Well, 117 radio buttons, 44 checkboxes, sorry for the typo here. But you can do everything. You can have multi-page layout, adding, removing products, edit quantity, color, size, see live calculation, select payment and delivery, and form validation. I have no idea how that works. Fallback is just a regular old email, right? But you might ask at this point, wait a second. How would you do live calculation? I mean, we do have the final price here, but how would you do that without JavaScript? How with CSS? Yes. The answer is always counters. You can define a CSS counter, and based on check, not check, 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 not checked, you can increase the counter amount, right, with an amount, and then you just display it using, content property. That's it. And you might say, this cannot potentially work. This is just ridiculous. Well, this is ridiculous, but it does work. And that's the thing. Because the only thing you need here to work, to make it work, is you need to check for support of checked values. Right? And you might say, well, but it's going to be huge. Well, yeah. In email, file size is limited to 102 kilobytes. Otherwise, Gmail starts clipping an email, right? And in Gmail, also, CSS is limited to 12,000 characters. And you might think, that's fine. Oh, this is not going to be fine if you start doing this on a big scale, right? And in fact, if you look into most email clients out there, 61% of email clients out there that are popular today, right, this top 10 that I showed before, will actually fully support it, which is kind of cool. And if you look into every single email marketing conference, they always talk about interactive email. Right? Has your company ever used interactive elements? And you will see that 50% already did, and 50% are playing with this technology yet. And what do they do? Important things. Carousel, image gallery, hamburger menu, quizzes. Who doesn't like a good quiz in the email, right? Of course. And reviews and hotspots, and can add to cart and have a search bar. I have no idea how search works there. I don't want to know, right? But this is just ridiculous, right? And this is the top email design trend 2018. If you want to earn good money, establish yourself as an experienced, full-stack email developer with 15 years of experience, right? You will put it on your portfolio, on your business card, everywhere. You will find a job tonight. And a very good one, I'm sure. And so you can do this in your email today. You can do this in your email today. Right? Even better, you can have fully functional checkout experience that will probably look like this. You open up an email, you start scrolling. At some point, you might be interested in an item. You click on that item. Maybe you select that you want to use your credit card. You click on checkout, and you're kind of brought to the page, and you're done. Right? And so you can have these thumbnails with gallery and stuff in your email as well. You can have these hotspots where you tap on one of the things, for example, and get some information about it, like you would usually have in HTML, well, in regular websites, right? And it's interesting to see that even Google now came up with AMP for email, where you need to add a new MIME type if you want to support it. I mean, it's open source, but again, it's AMP. But yeah, it kind of tries to do all those things that are done in a really dirty way in a simpler way. We can have AMP components and just plug them in, and they're interactive, right? And this is what it's probably going to look like then. For Doodle, for example, if you want to set up an appointment, instead of going to a website, why would you do that? Instead of going to a website, you just take care of everything right in your email. At this point, of course, only Gmail is going to support AMP, and we don't know when it's going to be rolled out, but it's available for developers preview already. So if you really feel like it, and you have a lot of Gmail customers, then maybe that would be interesting to explore, right? The same thing here on Pinterest, where you can pin items that you like without actually having to go to the website, right? And even on Booking, where you can actually preview some things or some hotels that you've chosen, look through the galleries, and reserve a spot or book if you want to. Like it prepares everything for you to be able to book right away. But remember, whenever you start doing this, you still have to worry about this as well. Like all those dirty little tricks for bulletproof email buttons, which is not just a button, it's a button, right? The same goes for everything else, like background images, and luckily there are resources. One of them that we're using sometimes is responsive email patterns, which collects all of the different techniques you can use. And another one is responsive email resources, right? Which is also very, very good. And if you're interested in this kind of stuff, there is a really great talk by Mark Robbins about this, CSS and interactive email. And Rebel Mail is the company to watch out. They do a lot of stuff in this domain. Okay? All right. Now, we did a lot. We could go like forever, but I don't want to go forever. Yes, that's much better. So we looked into some things, some hopefully more useful things, others more interesting things. I hope that some of them were actually really useful for you. But what I want to leave you with, it doesn't matter what technique you end up using, and it doesn't matter what your problem is. I think that every time you try to make something perfect, it's not going to work, just because there are always something in between. You will never come up with a perfect idea or perfect solution. Maybe that's just okay. So welcome to the world that we're living in of front-end in 2018, and welcome specifically to my world, which is just a short video, 1 minute, but it tells you how we live, and we should just embrace it. Oh, that's just sad. Thank you so much for Parallel Studio for designing, for building, for making it work. And it's a bit sad, but I have cats. That's okay. Cats always help. Cats, and thank you for playing.